Hello everyone, good time of the day and thank you everyone who joined to listen to our talk Go Beyond Limits with Power Platform. We hope you won't be disappointed. We'll introduce ourselves in a minute, but before that, just to let you know that if any questions, feel free to ask in the chat window, and the session recording will be available in about 2 weeks' time. Also, we encourage you to use the hashtag Scottish Summit 2021 in social media, share your thoughts and impressions for the event. We would also like to say thank you to our sponsors who made this event possible: Script Runner, DQ Global, Proxima 3, Red Spire, Agilysys, and Hitachi Solutions. So now I'll let Olena to introduce herself first.
Thank you, Andrew. Hi everyone, my name is Olena. I'm a developer, architect, and director at the company Andrew and I started a year bit ago, Technomancy. I've been working with Microsoft business applications for 16 years. I love to organize and participate in community projects. I am a co-organizer of BizApps Women Group in Australia.
Thanks, Olena. My name is Andrew Grischenko. I'm a software developer, architect, and entrepreneur, co-founder of Technomancy in partnership with Olena. I'm also passionate about flying, so reach out to me if you're a pilot or want to become one. Happy to talk anytime.
So, Power Platform. While many of you may have been already working with Power Apps, Flow, and a special Power BI, for mass adoption, it's still new technologies. And while there are a lot of great promises, can it actually deliver? And what was ultimately important for us, can we commit to the client and deliver on it? So, to code or not to code? Our journey to answer this eternal question went through 3 stages. At first, we thought we will implement almost everything with no code using Power Platform capabilities. At the second stage, then we faced some challenges and limits, which we'll talk about. We shifted our mindset into maximum code approach. However, as you will see, it didn't last long, and we ended up with the third stage of balanced code and no code solution, which we're happy about now.
That's right. And in order to give you a bit of context for the solution part that we'll be talking about, the project we worked on was a water usage billing automation for a large housing organization in Australia. The process of rebilling of the water usage to tenants was mostly manual, Excel files based, and not only took a lot of time, but also was prone to errors. So here I hand over to Olena to talk through her part of the story.
Thank you, Andrew. The collective bills PDF file contains all bills per account for the cycle. This file has to be split to multiple files. Each file has to be matched to the relevant tenant. The initial process was totally manual. To automate the process, we had to solve multiple problems. PDF processing is always fun in general. The problem one we faced is a custom split with numbers of pages which are vary from a document to a document. Problem 2, we have to extract a account number for each document. Problem 3, first 2 are more than enough. First, at the first stage, the no-code stage, it was a very short period of time. Really, we conducted a research to determine if it can be done completely in a no-code way. There are multiple connectors available to work with PDF and Power Automate. You can even set up a free or trial account to access some actions. This access is limited to the numbers of actions you can use per month, and other limits are applied as well. The limitation with a custom connector, the limitations are, the obvious one is the pricing. To meet some of the requirements with Mohambi PDF connector, the client had to go for the enterprise level, which is clear too much for non-for-profit organization. Also, we were unsure it will handle custom splitting. So we had to say bye-bye to no-code and come up with a different strategy. Coding is fun. I use PDF Sharp library to search in PDF for the account number and determine number of pages per document. I use PDF Big library to split the PDF to multiple documents. Stage 2 lasted while we prototyped it to the console app. Then it was a time to move it to a cloud. Our customers loved the console app, but they wanted us to deploy it to cloud. What could possibly go wrong, except for figuring out how to put together all moving parts? After a very short period of the design making suffering, we ended up with something like in the diagram on the next slide. But before I go and get to the initial design, I need to tell you something very important. I love Azure Functions, I really do. After this project, I'm the biggest fan and advocate of Azure Functions. They're easy to start with, easy to dev and debug, no-brainer deployment. I simply love it. This was the initial design. Azure Function calls Graph API to get the collective PDF build from SharePoint to process, then save multiple files back to SharePoint. Easy. Let's set up it with app permissions because solution doesn't require any user interaction. In the application registration, we have to give files read, write, all to the app. This is where customers stopped answering my emails. I thought he banned me forever. With the background conversations about data privacy and secure access to data and setting up gateways and custom access, the read-write all for all files in SharePoint didn't look right. Not to him, not to me. We can potentially authenticate it on the user, right? Absolutely not. Our client has MFA, and honestly, I was so done until then. And I do believe it's possible and doable at a certain degree. I just didn't have any energy to try. We also had a very tight timeline, allowing us just a fixed amount of hours to design and dev. This is how we ended up at stage 3. To be honest, until then, Andrew mentioned Azure Blob many times. I believed we can get away with not using it. Finally, I gave up. We trusted Power Automate to handle all Graph API stuff. We copied the collective file to Azure Blob input folder to trigger Azure Function to parse the file to create multiple files in the output folder. In the Power Automate, we waited for the result.json file to be created in output folder to copy files to SharePoint. It's demo time. Let's have a look at the SharePoint where we've got our file, which is a collective BIOS file, in the input folder. I'm clicking on the file just to show you how it looks like. As you can see, there are multiple documents in one file. The first document has 2 pages. The second document has only 1 page. And a third document also have only 1 page. We will be splitting this file and also extracting this count numbers. They're gonna be a part of the file name, the split document. Let's just now move to Azure. This is where we host our Azure function, and the splits PDF file has a trigger, which is blob, meaning then file gets created, this function is going to trigger. Now I'm going to go to the application and click on this magic button, say abracadabra, and the magic is going to happen. Then I'm going to quickly run here. See, there's nothing in here yet. See, the file was copied from SharePoint to Azure Blob. Now this file is going to get processed. In this folder, these are results files. Actually, after is also result.json file. Let's just have a look at one of the files. Our first file we downloaded. It's going to have 2 pages. Okay, this is what we expected to happen. And in the second file will only have one page. And as you can see, there's only one file left, and it's going to only have one page. We also have an account number as a part of our file name. So we extracted this text from PDF. This is awesome. I think now we should go and have a look at the flow, which was successfully finished running 4 minutes ago. I'm gonna go and have a look what's in the flow. In this flow, we've got on the update, then we clicked on the button. That's how magic started happening. We've got file from SharePoint, and we created file and Azure storage. Then we were waiting for file to process, and afterwards we get into the output folder. I put the block terminate here because we're not going to go to the actual matching. We didn't want to match, but we wanted to go through the splitting because matching will take a little bit of time, but I will show you a couple of steps here. Then we found this PDF file, and it actually matches certain criteria. We're doing some other black magic, and then we create this file in SharePoint. We also update some metadata, and this is basically it. The whole magic is happening. Coming back to what we discussed in the initial solution, all the Graph API connections, authentications are handled by the SharePoint connector. So we shouldn't worry here about any of these things. It sounds very simple, right? This is what we want.
Thanks to Olena. In my part of the story, I want to talk about the area of the system making billing calculations of water usage based on the data of the water usage, obviously, and property and tenancy data. So the first stage, as we mentioned, we try to implement maximum no-code approach, right? So all the business logic implemented was in the flow, right? So it's getting the record, main loop to calculate pro rata billing, and records update. It worked. I was proud of myself, but I tested it on 10 records. And I had about 30 to 40 actions in the main for loop. And that's important to know for the following, because while the logic was working fine on the 10 records, it was really slow on 300 records. And what is the worst, it actually didn't work at all on the whole data set of 3000 records, which was more real production load. It didn't work means that the execution was getting just suspended by the platform, and we never see it finished, right? In 30 hours period, it never finished. So at that moment, I had that kind of panic mode that it's not scalable. There were several elements of this solution to that limit. So the first one is to increase the parallelism of the execution of the, and we did it by adding concurrency to the main loop, which I mentioned. It didn't work with variables, so they were completely wrecked with the concurrent branches, so be mindful. I had to refactor and remove all variables which were in the parallel executed loop. Also, we had a few issues with the SharePoint connector when actions started failing randomly. It was like 1 in a few hundred, so there were no diagnoses, and it was just failing with a bad request. So as turned out, what helped is actually to set up correctly SharePoint connector. And there are two things which we did, is turn off the synchronous pattern and turn off the chunking, so that the content transfer allow chunking is off. So have that in mind. But more importantly was actually to get the right, while that helped a bit with the speed, somehow it didn't help with the bigger picture. We ran into wall just faster. So when we looked at the actual limits, we realized that we're actually not paying enough. So the actual solution was also to get the right license, and that are not easy to understand. As you can see on this screenshot, and this page was updated actually after we did the project, and there are, Microsoft defines those performance profiles, and depending on the plan that you have, you follow one or another performance profile. And with our Microsoft 365 Power Automate Plan 1, we had a low performance profile. So with the low performance profile, as you can see on that highlighted part, you have just 10,000 actions limits, right? We have, as I mentioned, 30-40 actions, and the loop just in 4,000 in several hundred records was easily getting over those 10,000, right? So have in mind that the point here, you don't have much time, or you don't have many actions available in your budget, right? So if you operate in lower limits, so have this in mind. Do your math, calculate the actions that your flow will be executing, the number of runs you will have at 24 hours. So that's on the licenses. Okay, speed was one concern, but there is another was started blocking us. Is the actually scaling the logic calculation. As more requirements get implemented, the complexity started to grow considerably. Looking back, I can say it would not be mentally not possible to get the full logic implementing using just flow. Maybe in theory it's possible, but it would not again perform that well. So we said, okay, it's time to get our favorite Azure function into play and move bits into code. So while the coding approach was promising obviously all the flexibility and performance that we needed, we started seeing that we need to do authentication. Obviously, we need to do client library for Dataverse. Use that data library to read the data, to write the data. And the problem is it's not only a fair bit of work to do, but we just didn't have time for that. So the solution for that and what we implemented is that balanced code, no code approach. So we moved to Azure Functions, only the calculation logic, and let the flow read data and update data, right? So it can do the all heavy lifting with connections. That worked perfectly. The Azure function is truly stateless. It takes JSON input, it does the calculation, produces JSON outputs, no problem. The custom connector to call the function is just a piece of cake, just a bit of YAML configuration. I'll show you, works as a charm. So let's have a look. Okay, so what you see on the screen is the flow that does the recharge calculations, right? So as I said, the flow does a few things. So first of all, it lists and gets the records, right? In our case, it gets water usage records based on some criteria with the filter. Then it also takes the other additional data like meters as well as the tenant information. So it takes the data about the tenants as a data set. So what's most interesting happening then is this custom connector. So on the custom connector, it's just API point to the Azure function defined, which sends three values as an input to the function. It sends just a JSON of the action list records of the usages, meters, and tenants. As simple as that. You just specify it as a value there. And on the other side of the recharge calculation function, you receive them. I'll show you code in a second. Yeah, and then the result of this function we'll see in action. It would be a JSON body that we then can parse into individual elements and use them just to create the new data based on these new calculations. So that's the flow high level, and we'll see it when it runs. What I wanted to show you is also the custom connector. So the custom connectors are defined here in the data tab. And yeah, so this is the water billing app custom connector. It's pretty easily defined. You basically just define the API point, and in this example, the API point is the Azure function endpoint API. And define the individual operations. So the operation that does calculation, it's called the recharge calculations. That's this one, the other one. But it's more convenient actually for me to work directly with the Swagger definition. So you can see it here. So it's just a configuration. You basically define the, for example, for recharge calculations, we define the parameters, which are data set. It's just a string, basically. The data set is passed as a string in this case. Meters, tenants, yeah, and yeah, some other details of the interface, right? And this is the endpoint. Yeah, after that, and you can, once you define the custom connector, you can use it in the flow like that, right? You just insert the new action. So when you need to add your custom defined connector, you just go to custom, and this is where you have your custom connectors defined, as easy as that. Okay, let's run this function. So what I will do, I'll go to this model-driven application, and I'll just kick the recharge calculations. So that process has started. Let's have a look. The flow, our flow started executing. Let's peek. How is it doing? So yeah, so this is the run log. So we've got the list of the usage records in this form, right? So that's how you get the records. So we've got tenants listed there. So that's another list of the records. Yeah, and this is where we call the function. So it's basically, yeah, gets those three sets, and it produces the output, and output is just a JSON, right? And this is how it works. So in the compose, I just put the results, right? Then the flow goes through the records and insert them basically in CDS. So it does some cleanup, and then it creates the records. But this is basically it, and it runs just in a few seconds. And the Azure function, yeah, that was executed just a few seconds ago. Very handy. Okay, and another thing that I wanted to show you is actually how this, what's behind that endpoint, how you get the data from Power Platform from in your Azure functions, how you parse them. So I'll just show you the piece of the Azure function. So I won't cover obviously how to create Azure functions. I hope you either know already or can find it out. But there is some data that is defined to get the data. So sorry, some class is defined to get the data in the format. So I would define the class to pass the JSON string. So I define the recipient class, which has all these attributes that I need for billing, for meters, and for tenants. Then I'll also define the helper class, which will get, which will get all this data as one parameter, like those three things. And yes, that's the other helping data, but this is the main function. So this is the function which is called as a HTTP endpoint. And yeah, there is some login. So this is where the actual body is get retrieved. So this is where all the data is represented as a string, and it deserialized as a JSON into that data structure that I defined above. And then it's split individually into individual structures of the bills, tenants, and meter data, just using the serialized object into the helper functions. And then that is it. So then you just work with those structures that you will work in your code, wherever you write it on JavaScript, C# or whatever you like in the Azure function. You just work with those structures, whether it's arrays or lists, etc. So it's a bit simplistic, but cheap and cheerful. And one of the things you may ask, okay, how big these objects can be. So just to tell you that we passed the data about 8 megabytes from the platform to the Azure function, and it worked perfectly fine, right? It took a few seconds to gulp it and process, but it worked fine. Yeah, that's maybe it, and we can cover the rest of the questions if you want to. Thank you.
So let's summarize this story. Looking back on what we've implemented and launched, in the time frames we had with just 2 of us, could we do it using traditional code technologies? No way, it wouldn't be possible even close. Could we do all with no-code solutions only? As you've seen, no, we did have to take some pieces out into code. But the right balance is to let each technology to do what it does best. Flow is perfect for integrations. Code is best for speed and algorithms.
Yes, that's right. And another takeaway in learning is that the limitations we found in the solution approach was discovered quite early in the project, and that was great. We managed to review it and find alternative options and have time to implement them.
So we have to embrace it, limits to exist, which we don't mind if we are flexible and aware of it. But there are no limits really. Just be mindful and keep creating great apps.
That's it.
Yeah, thank you very much for participating, and we're happy to answer all your questions.
Thank you.